Rome, Italy. May 26, 1940. 10:17 a.m. Benito Mussolini was sitting behind the massive desk inside the Renaissance palace of Palazzo Venezia, which had become the command center of fascist Italy. The first light of morning filtered through the tall windows, spreading across the polished surface and illuminating the maps laid out before him. When he looked through the glass, he could see Piazza Venezia, nearly empty except for a few pedestrians wandering the square. In less than 3 hours, Marshal Pietro Badoglio would arrive for a meeting, one that neither of them yet realized would set in motion events leading to both of their downfalls. Mussolini was 56 years old. His jaw was still prominent, thrust forward as it had been captured thousands of times by photographers, but he was slowly beginning to age. He had ruled Italy for nearly 18 years, no leader since unification had remained in power this long. He had created fascism, shaped it, disciplined it, and built an empire in Africa. Adolf Hitler called him a master, a teacher. Yet this morning, as he watched German tanks overrun France at a pace that stunned the world, Mussolini felt something he had not felt in years. He felt insignificant. The reports on his desk laid out the situation in critical detail. German forces had entered France on May 10. 16 days. In 16 days they had shattered the French army, bypassed the Maginot Line, and advanced all the way to the English Channel. The French government was in chaos. The British were trapped at Dunkirk. A war expected to last for years seemed as if it might end within weeks, and Italy was watching from the sidelines. Mussolini picked up a telegram that had arrived from Berlin 3 days earlier. Hitler's language was polite, but the message beneath it was clear. The spoils of war would go to those who fought for them. Germany did not need Italy's help to defeat France. If Italy wanted territorial gains, if it wanted a seat at the peace conference, if it wanted to be treated as an equal partner in the new European order, then it would have to act before the war ended. He had spent 9 months in what he called non-belligerence. Not neutrality, that word suggested weakness, but a calculated waiting period. When Hitler invaded Poland in September, Mussolini had privately been furious at the betrayal. The Pact of Steel they had signed in May 1939 was intended to guarantee peace until 1942, allowing Italy time to rearm and build the military strength required for a major war. But Hitler had not consulted him before attacking Poland. He had not informed him until the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact had already been signed. Hitler had treated Italy as a junior partner whose opinion did not matter. Mussolini had chosen not to enter the war and had watched events unfold. He told himself he was acting strategically. Italy's army was not ready. It lacked ammunition, modern equipment, and adequate training. The Navy had no aircraft carriers. The Air Force possessed planes that looked impressive in propaganda films but would struggle against modern fighters. Marshal Badoglio had submitted detailed reports documenting every deficiency. But 9 months of observation had taught Mussolini something he did not want to accept: Hitler did not need him. Germany was winning the war alone, and when it ended, Italy would have no claim to victory. Mussolini's long-held territorial ambitions would remain fantasies. Nice, Savoy, Corsica, Tunisia, control of the Mediterranean, everything would slip away. Italy would stand on the sidelines, a spectator to another nation's triumph. When the door opened, Minister of Popular Culture Dino Alfieri entered. Alfieri was carrying the proof copies of the next day's newspapers. The headlines proclaimed German victories, French collapse, the inevitability of Axis triumph. Mussolini barely looked at them. He had been reading such headlines for weeks, each one reminded him of Italy's absence from the stage. "The people are uneasy," Alfieri said. "They see Germany winning and ask why Italy is doing nothing." "The people will do what they are told," Mussolini replied, but there was no conviction in his voice. He had built his rule on the image of Italy as a warrior nation, a modern Rome destined for greatness through conquest. Every speech, every parade, every propaganda poster had proclaimed this message. Now the decisive war was being fought, and won, and Italy was watching. Alfieri left, and Mussolini returned to the maps. He traced the Alpine border between Italy and France with his finger. The terrain was brutal, mountains rising above 3,000 meters, narrow passes that could be defended by small forces. The French had fortified these mountains for years. An Italian assault across the Alps, even against a weakened enemy, would be costly. But that was not the point. The point was that when the armistice was signed, Italian soldiers had to be fighting. Italian dead had to be counted alongside German dead. Italy had to earn the right to sit at the peace conference as a belligerent, not as a neutral observer. At exactly 1 o'clock, Marshal Pietro Badoglio was escorted into Mussolini's office. Badoglio was 68 years old, a veteran of 3 wars, the conqueror of Ethiopia, and Italy's most senior military officer. He had learned to navigate political waters without drowning, carrying himself with the rigid formality of a career soldier. He knew Mussolini had summoned him to discuss war. He also knew that his task was to explain why entering the war would be a catastrophic mistake. Mussolini began immediately. "I have sent a written statement to Hitler," he said, his voice filling the room with the theatrical intensity he reserved for major declarations. "I told him clearly that I do not intend to remain silent and that I will be in a position to declare war on France and Britain as of June 5. Badoglio's face remained expressionless, but he gripped his briefcase tightly. He had prepared for this moment, gathered documents, rehearsed arguments. But standing in this office, looking at Mussolini's familiar mask of certainty, he sensed that resistance would be futile. "Duce," he began carefully, "I must present the military realities. Our army is not prepared for offensive operations. We do not have sufficient ammunition reserves even for a short campaign. Many divisions are under strength. Equipment is outdated. In June, with the high passes still snow-covered, moving troops across the Alps presents severe logistical challenges." Mussolini cut him off. "I need only a few thousand dead," he said. "So that I can sit at the peace conference as a man who fought." The words hung in the air between them. Badoglio had heard similar remarks before, had learned to interpret Mussolini's statements politically rather than literally. But this was different. This was a cold calculation. Italian soldiers would die not to achieve military objectives, but to purchase diplomatic legitimacy. Mussolini continued. "The war will be over by September. Germany has already won. France is collapsing. Britain will seek peace within months. This is not about winning the war, Badoglio. It is about Italy's position when peace is made." Badoglio opened his briefcase and removed a stack of papers. "Duce, with your permission, I will detail the deficiencies." He began reading from his reports. At best, There was enough artillery ammunition for 3 weeks of continuous operations. Tank units lacked sufficient fuel. Air squadrons flew aircraft that could not match British or French performance. The officer corps was stretched thin by commitments in Albania, Libya, and Ethiopia. Mussolini listened with visible impatience. When Badoglio paused, the Duce waved his hand dismissively. "These are technical matters. You are the chief of the general staff. Find solutions." "Solutions cannot be found in 2 weeks, Duce. These deficiencies accumulated over years. The Ethiopian campaign drained our resources. The intervention in Spain exhausted our reserves. Effective operations against France would require." "I do not want effective operations." Mussolini stood and walked toward the window. Below, afternoon traffic moved across the square. "I want operations. I want action. I want Italy to be present when history is written." Badoglio carefully returned the papers to his briefcase. He recognized Mussolini's tone. The decision had been made. Everything that followed was theater, consultation as a formality, preserving the illusion that Mussolini ruled by consensus rather than decree. "May I ask what assurances we have received from Germany regarding our territorial objectives?" Badoglio asked quietly. "Hitler has promised that Italy will receive the gains it deserves." "In writing, Duce." Mussolini turned from the window. "Are you questioning Hitler's honor?" "I am questioning the reliability of agreements between powers with divergent interests." Badoglio had learned throughout his career which truths could be spoken and which could not. But standing in this room, watching Mussolini prepare to lead Italy into an unwinnable war for reasons unrelated to military strategy, he could no longer maintain polite fictions. He continued. 3 days ago you told me this war would be suicide. You used that word, Duce. Suicide. Has anything changed in 3 days to make the military situation less dire? Mussolini replied coldly. What has changed is that Germany is about to win the war, and Italy is about to be left behind. That is what has changed, Marshal. The meeting ended with Badoglio agreeing to prepare operational plans for a declaration of war on June 5. As he left Palazzo Venezia, he knew the date was optimistic. The army needed more time. The navy needed more time. The air force needed more time. But time was the one thing Mussolini refused to give. That evening, Mussolini met with his son-in-law and foreign minister, Count Galeazzo Ciano. Ciano was 37 years old, handsome, sophisticated, fluent in several languages. He had served as foreign minister for 4 years, negotiating with Hitler, Ribbentrop, Chamberlain, and every major figure in European diplomacy. He also kept a detailed diary, recording conversations and decisions he believed would be historically significant. They dined together in a small room adjoining Mussolini's office. The meal was simple, to Mussolini's taste, lightly sauced pasta, bread, water. Mussolini ate quickly and mechanically, as if food were fuel rather than pleasure. I informed Badoglio today, Mussolini said while eating. We are declaring war on June 5. Ciano set down his fork. Did Hitler ask us to wait? 5 days remain. There is a slight problem with the timetable. Instead, we will announce on the 10th. The army is not ready. Galeazzo, the army is never ready. Generals always need more time, more resources, more assurances. But history does not wait for generals to feel ready. Chano had learned to gauge his father-in-law's moods, to know when argument might be effective and when resistance was futile. Tonight, Mussolini displayed the dangerous certainty that had brought him to power and kept him there for 18 years. The people are not eager for war, Chano said. Reports from the provinces show. When I tell the people to be enthusiastic, they will be enthusiastic. Mussolini pushed his unfinished plate aside. Do you know what I received yesterday? A report from our embassy in Berlin. Our military attaché says German officers openly mock Italy. They call us cowards. They say we have betrayed the Axis. They predict that once France falls, Germany will settle accounts with Italy. Chano had read the same reports. For months he had tried to decipher German intentions through diplomatic hypocrisy and intelligence fragments. Hitler wouldn't. Hitler would do anything that serves German interests. Right now, he needs our declaration to present a united front. After the war. Mussolini shrugged. After the war, Italy will either be a partner that fought alongside Germany or a burden to be managed. Those are the options, Galeazzo. There is no third. May 29, 1940. Palazzo Venezia. A meeting hall that had hosted cabinet sessions, military briefings, and countless hours of bureaucratic debate. Mussolini sat at the head of a long table. Around him were Italy's military commanders, Chief of the General Staff Marshal Badoglio, Army Commander Marshal Rodolfo Graziani, Navy Commander Admiral Domenico Cavagnari. Generals and admirals whose careers spanned decades, whose uniforms bore medals from Libya, Ethiopia, and Spain, men who had learned to balance military judgment with political necessity. Mussolini spoke for 40 minutes. He described Germany's inevitable victory. He outlined Italy's territorial ambitions, Nice, Savoy, and Corsica from France, Malta, Aden, and British Somaliland from Britain. Djibouti, Tunisia, and Morocco from collapsing Allied empires. He envisioned an Italy dominant in the Mediterranean, controlling sea routes between Europe and Africa, the Atlantic and the Middle East. A new Roman Empire, not built through decades of patient development, but through opportunistic alliance with German conquest. When Mussolini finished, Badoglio spoke. His tone was measured, his arguments framed as technical assessments rather than political challenges. Ammunition shortages were not opinions but mathematical facts. Dividing current stockpiles by expected daily consumption yielded approximately 3 weeks of sustained operations. After that, Italian artillery would fall silent. Graziani added his assessment. On paper, the army had 60 divisions. In reality, perhaps 20 were adequately equipped and trained for offensive operations. The rest were garrison troops, colonial forces, reserve formations that existed mainly on organizational charts. Launching an attack across the fortified Alpine frontier would require months of logistical preparation, not days. Admiral Cavagnari summarized the Navy's condition. The Italian fleet was modern, powerful, and a legitimate threat to British control of the Mediterranean. But without air support, without proper coordination with the Air Force, without bases to sustain prolonged operations, the Navy could defend but not project power. The British Mediterranean Fleet was stationed at Gibraltar, Malta, and Alexandria. Any Italian operation would face constant threat from these bases. For 3 hours they presented their cases, not arguments against war itself, which would have been politically dangerous, but careful documentation of military unpreparedness. The implicit message was clear: wait. Give us 6 months. Give us a year. Allow us to build the forces needed to fight effectively. Mussolini listened without interruption. When the presentations ended, he stood. Gentlemen, I hear your concerns. I understand the military difficulties. But I ask you to understand the political reality. Germany's war will be won by autumn. If Italy is not fighting when the war ends, Italy will not be present when peace is made. That is unacceptable. He paused, allowing the silence to emphasize his next words. I do not need to conquer France. I need Italian soldiers fighting when the armistice is signed. A few thousand casualties, a few territorial gains, however modest. Enough to justify our place at the peace conference. That is the objective. Not military victory, but political legitimacy. Badoglio tried once more. Duce, even limited operations require adequate preparation. The risks. They are acceptable. The risks of inaction are greater. The meeting ended with Mussolini ordering preparations for war to begin on June 10. The 5-day delay requested by Hitler provided minimal preparation time, but was longer than Mussolini's original June 5 deadline. As the officers filed out, Graziani waited until only he and Badoglio remained. He cannot be dissuaded, Graziani said quietly. No, Badoglio agreed. He will not. Then we prepare for war. June 1, 1940. King Victor Emmanuel III summoned Mussolini to the Quirinal Palace. The king was 70 years old, barely 5 feet tall, a figure full of contradictions. Constitutionally Italy's sovereign, head of state, commander-in-chief of the armed forces. In practice, he had ceded most of his power to Mussolini, allowed fascism to grow under his nominal rule, preserved the constitutional monarchy while benefiting from Italy's imperial expansion. The two men met in a private study, without aides or witnesses. Victor Emmanuel did not offer Mussolini a seat, a subtle reminder that old protocol still mattered in the palace. You intend to declare war, the king said. It was not a question. Yes, Your Majesty. On June 10. The army has informed me they are unprepared. The army never considers itself prepared, Your Majesty. Generals are trained to identify risks and obstacles. Balancing those risks against political necessity is my responsibility. Victor Emmanuel walked to a window overlooking the palace gardens. I have reigned for 40 years, Mussolini. I have seen wars begin confidently and end in disaster. The risks you call acceptable could destroy Italy. The risk of inaction is certain destruction. Germany is creating a new European order. Italy will either be part of it or subject to it. There is no third option. And you trust Hitler to respect Italian interests. I trust Hitler to understand that a strong ally is preferable to a resentful dependent. The king turned from the window. I could refuse my approval. The Constitution requires royal assent for declarations of war. For a long moment neither man spoke. Both understood the consequences. If Victor Emmanuel refused, Mussolini could appeal to the fascist Grand Council, mobilize the party apparatus, and provoke a constitutional crisis. Such a crisis would weaken Italy at the moment unity was most critical. The king would appear powerless, Mussolini insubordinate, Italy divided. Mussolini said carefully, "Your Majesty's wisdom has always served Italy well. I hope it continues to do so." Victor Emmanuel recognized the implicit threat. He also accepted that he had no practical means of stopping Mussolini's war. "I grant my approval. But I will not grant you supreme military command. Operational authority will be divided between you and the military chiefs. That is not negotiable." Mussolini accepted the compromise. He needed the king's signature. Details of command could be negotiated later, smoothed through the usual bureaucratic mechanisms that translated constitutional provisions into practical arrangements. June 10, 1940. 4:30 p.m. Ciano sat in his office at Palazzo Chigi, preparing the formal declarations of war. Two documents, identical in diplomatic language, addressed respectively to the British and French ambassadors. The wording had been debated, refined, and approved by Mussolini. At precisely 4:30 p.m., Ciano would summon the ambassadors and deliver the declarations. War would formally begin at midnight. Ambassador André François Poncet arrived first. 53 years old, a career diplomat stationed in Rome since 1938, he had observed fascist Italy with an educated eye, reported on its political currents to Paris, and attempted, unsuccessfully, to preserve Franco-Italian cooperation. Ciano received him formally, without pleasantries. "Your Excellency, I have been instructed by the Duce to inform you that as of midnight tonight, a state of war will exist between Italy and France." François Poncet's face turned pale. "Count Ciano, France has offered Italy every opportunity to resolve differences through negotiation. We propose territorial adjustments, trade agreements, political arrangements. France is already engaged in a desperate struggle with Germany. Why does Italy choose to strike now?" Ciano had no good answer. The diplomatic justifications sounded hollow even as he spoke them. Italy has endured decades of encirclement and humiliation. Plutocratic democracies have consistently obstructed Italian aspirations. The time has come. The time has come for Italy to stab France in the back while Germany holds its arms. François Poncet rose. "I will convey this declaration to my government. But you should know this decision will be remembered. Governments change. But peoples remember. The French people will remember that Italy declared war at France's darkest hour." 15 minutes later, British Ambassador Sir Percy Lorraine arrived. He accepted the declaration with the calm of a diplomat seasoned by European crises. When Ciano finished reading, Lorraine merely nodded. "I understand, Count. I will inform London immediately." He stood to leave, then paused. "May I ask a question? Does Il Duce truly believe Britain will surrender once France falls?" "Yes," Ciano replied. "Then Il Duce is making a terrible miscalculation. Good day, Count Ciano." At 6 p.m. Mussolini stepped onto the balcony of Palazzo Venezia. Below, a crowd assembled by fascist party organizers filled the square, perhaps 200,000 people, many compelled to attend. Party members chanted, but many others stood silent. Mussolini struck his famous pose, gripping the balcony railing, thrusting his jaw forward, and addressed microphones broadcasting across Italy. "Combatants of land, sea, and air. Black shirts of the revolution. Men and women of Italy, of the Empire, and of the Kingdom of Albania. The hour marked by destiny has struck. The hour of irrevocable decisions has arrived. The declaration of war has already been delivered to the ambassadors of Great Britain and France. Organized sections of the crowd cheered. Others remained silent. Mussolini pressed on toward the climax of his speech. We take the field against the plutocratic and reactionary democracies that have always obstructed the progress of the Italian people and repeatedly conspired against our very existence. We go to war to secure our freedom, guarantee our future, and take the place among the great powers that is rightfully ours. More cheers followed, but within the crowd stood Marshal Badoglio, observing what Mussolini could not see from above. The enthusiasm was artificial. The silence between orchestrated chants spoke volumes. When the speech ended and the crowd dispersed, it did so quickly and quietly. There were no spontaneous celebrations. No jubilant parades. Only a city that knew war had begun and returned to its routines. That night, Chano wrote in his diary, "I am sad, very sad. The adventure begins. May God help Italy." In Washington, President Franklin Roosevelt addressed a crowd at the University of Virginia, his words broadcast nationwide. On June 10, 1940, the hand that held the dagger plunged it into the back of its neighbor. In London, Prime Minister Winston Churchill, only a month into office, addressed the House of Commons. He barely mentioned Italy. Britain was fighting for survival against Germany. Italy's declaration was almost an afterthought, another problem added to an overwhelming crisis. In Berlin, Adolf Hitler welcomed the news. Italy had finally entered the war. The Axis was united. German victories would now be shared victories, and when the war ended, Hitler would not have to explain why Germany had fought alone while its ally did nothing. June 21, 1940. Italian forces finally launched an offensive into southeastern France. The operation was a disaster. Italian troops attacked fortified Alpine positions in snow and freezing temperatures. Despite being outnumbered and facing defeat by German forces advancing from the north, French defenders held the mountain passes. Italian casualties mounted rapidly. The offensive gained barely 4 miles of territory before France requested an armistice with Germany on June 22. On June 18, Mussolini traveled to Munich to meet Hitler and discuss peace terms. According to Chano's diary, Mussolini left the meeting deeply humiliated, realizing his role was secondary. Hitler had essentially won the war against France alone. Italy's contribution was minimal, its territorial gains modest, its position at the peace conference nothing like the equal partnership Mussolini had envisioned. But the decision had been made. Italy was at war. The few thousand casualties Mussolini had deemed acceptable would become hundreds of thousands. The quick war meant to end by September would last for years. North African campaigns, the Greek disaster, dependence on Germany, Italy's eventual occupation, the collapse of fascism, Mussolini's death hanging from a meat hook at a Milan gas station in April 1945, all of it began on June 10, 1940, when Mussolini decided that Italy's honor required entering a war it could not win. A war whose causes had nothing to do with military strategy, and everything to do with one man's calculation. That a seat at the table of history mattered more than the price Italy would pay to sit there. Historical records show that Italy's declaration of war on June 10, 1940 opened a Mediterranean front that would consume millions of lives and vast resources. British forces in North Africa, initially numbering just 36,000 men, would grow into massive armies fighting from Egypt to Tunisia. Italy's invasion of Greece in October 1940 would end in disaster, requiring German intervention that delayed Hitler's invasion of the Soviet Union by critical weeks. The military deficiencies carefully documented by Badoglio and others before the war would prove accurate. Italy would surrender in 1943, the fascist regime would collapse, and Italy would become a battlefield between Germans and Allies until the final days of the war. Mussolini's decision in the late May and early June hours of 1940 did not stem from ignorance. He knew Italy was unprepared. He knew the risks. He knew his military commanders opposed immediate war. But he chose to place political calculation above military reality, to value Italy's place at the peace conference above Italian lives, to gamble that Germany's victory would be so swift and complete that Italy's weaknesses would never be exposed. He was wrong. If you found this historical narrative compelling, do not forget to subscribe, comment, and like our channel for more World War II stories. These are not merely history lessons, they are examinations of moments when individual decisions altered the course of nations. Italy's choice for war was shaped not only by vast historical forces, but by the calculation of a single man sitting in a Renaissance palace in the autumn of 1940, watching the world change and deciding that Italy could not afford to be left behind. Understanding these hours and decisions helps us understand how nations are led into catastrophe even when warning signs are clear. Thank you for watching.